Hi, team. Over the course of our lives, we're going to be in a position where we have to ask people for a letter of recommendation. In this video, I'm going to highlight several key points we need to be thinking about even before we send that email request asking that person to write a letter for us. The first thing to be thinking about is who are the people we know in our network that we'd like to write a letter for us. I can't stress enough the fact that the majority of requests from people to write a letter of recommendation go to a small population of workers, of the workforce. Why? Well, let's take a second and think about who the individuals are that we're likely to ask. Number one, we're looking for somebody that we expect will actually write the letter for us. So we're thinking about people who are reliable. Number two, we're often also thinking about people that we liked or have had a positive experience with. Oftentimes, those people are also individuals who have had a positive experience with many other people. And third, when we think about people to ask for a letter of recommendation, oftentimes there's a title or position behind that individual's name. It's those three characteristics that often stand out when it comes to who are the people I'd like to ask to write a letter for me. The reason this is important to be thinking about is because these individuals get asked for a letter of recommendation a lot. And the better job we can do of providing the information they're going to need when writing that letter, the more likely we are to not only get a yes from them, but we're going to get a letter from them that's going to help us get that job, be admitted into that program, or get that nomination we're seeking. All right, so when it comes to actually making that ask, after we've identified the individual or individuals we'd like to write a letter for us, here's the things we need to include when making that ask. First off, we should be very clear about what are we specifically applying for. Is it a job? Is it an award? Is it admission into a certain program? At the same time, who is sponsoring this award? Or where does this program reside? Or what company or employer is this position with? What this does for that person writing the letter recommendation is give them some really important information that they're likely to include in that very, very first sentence in the letter recommendation they draft. Next, it's also really important that we're sharing why are we interested in this job? Why are we interested in this particular program? Or why do we think we're the best candidate for this particular award? Here's where it's important we're tying in some of our qualifications or our background. And so what specific qualifications, based on that job description or the program admission requirements or the award we're seeking, what specifically makes us stand out? Here's where it's really important we're tying in some real life examples. And so if we're pulling off a few responsibilities from a job description and saying, well, I've done all of this, let's include for that individual what those examples are. So if we have in the past been responsible for identifying new potential clients, well, what did that experience look like? If the program we're applying for says students have to have a particular GPA, or they've had to have a certain level of professional experience or taken specific courses, well, what are those courses that we've taken? Or how does our professional background support the requirements that are put forth in this program? We also need to include very specifically what is the timeline we're looking at, and what is that specific due date that we need that letter of recommendation submitted. This also means being very clear about who is responsible for submitting that letter of recommendation. If we need the individual to email it back, that looks a lot different than asking the individual to not only write the letter, but to also expect an email request to come through, or to send this letter of recommendation once it's complete to a particular email or hard mail something, send something in the mail. The last thing to include is any other additional details, any other tidbits that you think the person needs to know. All of the information they will need when it comes time to actually drafting this letter. So if the job says we're looking for certain attributes or traits in an individual, highlight and let that person know what those attributes are that you specifically possess, and how have you demonstrated you actually possess those attributes. Finally, some really quick last tips that we sometimes forget. Number one, before actually submitting the names of individuals that will provide a letter of recommendation, make sure you get their permission first. For individuals who write a lot of letters of recommendation, it can be a little bit disappointing to all of a sudden see you have a new responsibility and you have to write a letter of recommendation for somebody that you never even talked to about the role. At the same time, if the individual agrees to write one letter of recommendation, that doesn't mean they're agreeing to write 15 or 20 different letters of recommendation. So if you have your interests, or eyes set on a particular graduate program, or a particular job, that doesn't mean the individual is going to happily agree to write 15 different letters of recommendation, or even use that exact same letter of recommendation in 15 different responses, especially if it's going to require a lot of extra work every time that letter needs to be submitted to a new database. Finally, and I can't stress this enough, it's important to at least have some kind of connection with the person we're asking this letter for. So if you've had very little one-on-one and personal interaction with this individual, reach out to them ahead of time and even request to meet with them. I can't promise that they'll happily agree to meet, but by forming some type of personal relationship, what we're doing there is demonstrating to that person we're asking that, number one, we value their time, we value their expertise, and we want to make sure they have all the information they need from us in order to successfully write a letter of recommendation that's going to help us get that job, be admitted to that program, or get that award. Hey team, if you found this video helpful, hit the subscribe button, as each week we're putting out more videos related to not only the screw-ups I've made in my career, but also the strategies we can use to help us advance in our careers. Time for development. Invest in yourself.